So hello everyone, my name is Philip and today I'm going to talk about lab safety. So first thing, why should we even care about lab safety? Number one, when you work safely, it protects you. Number two, it also protects other lab staff. Number three, it protects cleaners that might be working within the lab. Number four, protects visitors. And finally, it protects whatever you're working on. So I'm sure when you guys are working, when you're doing any tests, any analysis, I'm sure that you don't want your work to be spoiled, to go to waste. So it is actually very important that you take care of the safety within the lab. This isn't just about you, it is also about others that are involved working with you. So remember, lab safety matters. Now, first thing, you should always protect yourself using the proper personal protective equipment, or PPE. So wear clothing and protective wear that are identified within our laboratory risk assessment. Laboratory coats must always be kept fastened. Always wear covered shoes or work boots, and long hair must always be tied back. So these are just some key pointers that you should be aware of when you're using PPEs. Another thing to be aware of is you should always wear gloves. Okay, there are many different types of protective gloves that are available. Make sure you're using the correct ones for the job that you will be doing. Remember that you will need to select chemical protection gloves according to the materials and or substances with which you will be working with. And also remove your gloves before using instruments, computers, telephones, and before leaving the laboratory. I think the last point is very important because I often see people that are working within the lab. Sure, they're handling chemicals with their gloves, but they often forget to clean up after themselves, and they will use their gloves elsewhere when they're touching the computers or touching telephones, and the next person that comes along that touches these items, boom, guess what? They have chemicals on their hands with no protection. So this is actually a very important point. Next thing that we should look at is laboratory hygiene. Again, never eat, drink, or smoke within a laboratory. Never apply cosmetics. Do not touch your face, mouth, or eyes. Never chew or suck on pens or pencils. And always wash your hands before you leave the lab and before you eat. Now these might seem very self-explanatory, very straightforward, common sense, but a lot of the time people tend to forget these basic rules. Now, let us familiarize ourselves with some general lab hazards. First one, fire. Second, breakage of glassware. Third one, spillages. Fourth, high pressures in gas cylinders. Fifth, extremes of heat and cold. Sixth, chemical hazards. And seventh, biological hazards. Of course, there are actually other hazards that you might encounter within the lab, but these 7 that I mentioned are the very typical ones that everybody should be aware of. Now let's look at the first one, which is fire. So we should focus on awareness and prevention. We should use the minimum quantity for flammable substances. We should store flammable substances in special storage cabinets, and we should use temperature controlled heating sources. For example, if you're dealing with water bath, or if you need to heat up something, okay, like a liquid, so you should use a water bath rather than using a hot plate or Bunsen burner whenever possible. Now the other thing you should look for is make sure corridor fire doors and laboratory doors are always kept shut at all times, and make sure that you know what to do when there's a fire and when you hear a fire alarm. So wherever you might be working, be sure that you are familiar with all the rules in terms of an emergency, how to behave, what to do. That is very important. Second thing that we should look at is glasswares. Always use correct techniques for the insertion of tubing onto glassware. Never use glassware under pressure or vacuum unless it is designed for the job and suitably shielded. Dispose of chipped or broken glassware. It is a risk to you and also others in the lab. And finally, always dispose of broken glass in a dedicated glass or sharps bin and not in a general waste bin. Now this is very important. Again, if you have any concerns or doubts about which type of glassware you should be using for a given test or application, be sure to ask. Also, handling vacuum is very important. Make sure the glassware that you're using can actually accommodate vacuum, right? Otherwise it might explode and hurt other people. So it's also very important. And finally, again, glasswares, always dispose into the broken glassware bin. Another thing to be aware of is spillages. So if you happen to have any spillages, report to your supervisor immediately. Again, control spillages right away if the chemical is known and it is safe to do so. Proceed only if you're trained and equipped. Also, dispose of any hazardous material as toxic waste. Remember, messy workers are poor workers, so try to keep your areas neat and tidy, and this way it will help to minimize the risk of spillages. Now, if you know what you're dealing with, what types of spillages you're dealing with, and if it's safe to do so, try to control the spillages. First, inform your supervisor of the spill and that you intend to deal with the spill. There should at least be 2 trained members of staff that should act as a response team when controlling spillages. Remember to eliminate ignition sources and also isolate the electrical supply. Ventilate the area and close the doors. Open windows wherever possible. Isolate the spill by sealing off the area. And also assemble all of the equipment that you need, such as your spillage kit, and make preparations to deal with the spill in a safe area. And always remember to wear the appropriate personal protective equipment, or PPE. Contain the spillage by cordoning off the spill area with absorbable spill pillows, and use absorbable mats or spillage absorbent granules to soak up the spill. Once the spill has been contained and the area is safe, place the waste into a suitable sealable plastic bag. Clearly label and identify the waste. So these are some general steps to be aware of when you're trying to deal with spillages. Now, the other hazards that we should be aware of are gas cylinders. Never use gas cylinders without formal training. Always remember to check for leaks. So for example, when you're checking for leaks, you can use soapy water or other suitable solutions to see if there are any air bubbles being formed. Always try to keep gas cylinders outside. Don't keep them inside the lab. Remember, cylinders are very heavy and can do serious damage if they fall, not just to the lab equipment, but it can also do damage to you. Ensure that they are properly chained when the gas cylinders are being used, and move only with a cylinder trolley. So if you have to move a gas cylinder, don't just use your bare hands and roll it. Make sure you use a cylinder trolley when transporting. And finally, remember to use regulators and control equipment suitable for the gas concerned. And this is very important because if you're using the wrong types of regulators or equipment, then serious things could happen with your gas cylinder. Another thing to be aware of is laboratory and electrical equipment. Never use any laboratory equipment unless you are trained or have been authorized to do so. As well as injuring yourself, you may also deal very costly damage to the equipment and also in the lab. Always do a visual check on electrical equipment before use, looking for obvious wear or defects. Again, remember, never use defective equipment. If you have any doubts about the status of the equipment, be sure to report to your supervisor right away and do not start using it. Another main point to be aware of, and I think it's one of the key aspects of lab safety, is housekeeping. Be sure to always keep your workplace tidy, clear up the waste, put things away as you finish with them. Make sure everything is safe before you leave things unattended or before you leave a work area. Remember, a tidy laboratory can help prevent accidents. In the previous section where we were talking about spillages, remember, messy workers tend to cause spillages. So remember, try to keep your areas nice and tidy, maintain good housekeeping within your area, and that way, I believe, is usually the best way to prevent any laboratory incidents. Another hazard that people should be aware of is waste materials. So organic and inorganic waste should be segregated. Acids and bases should be neutralized prior to disposal. Okay. Remember to neutralize acids and bases, because otherwise, if you don't neutralize it, it could react violently with other chemicals and you'll have a serious incident on your hands. Solvents and oils must be segregated into the correct waste bottle or drum. Do not put materials down the drain or in with normal waste. Do not mix different unknown chemicals together, because when you do that, stuff will happen. Maybe a small fire, even explosion can happen because of chemical reactions that take place. Finally, chemical waste and normal waste, again, should always be segregated from each other because they will undergo different types of treatments. Last thing, whenever you have any doubts, be sure to ask. Do not carry out a new or unfamiliar procedure until you have been fully trained and you understand the necessary precautions. Do not guess, because when you guess, that is when problems happen and accidents will take place. Well, that's it, and thank you for listening.